Thank you very much for turning up today. My name is Oliver Heath, and I've been working with Planted. Planted is the first show to reconnect people, spaces, and nature. And we're delighted to have you all here today to share our event and our panel discussion. In this third of the talks of the day, we'll be investigating the role that our toxic cities play in our lives. So, some pollutants you can see, some you can't, but all reduce the quality of our lives in a number of different ways. Over the last 18 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we've kind of been away from our cities. There's been an absence. And because of that, we've started to recognize the impact that our lives, our everyday lives, are having on our cities and our spaces. We've looked around, we've seen wildlife returning to our cities. We've seen and heard birds singing in the trees. There's been cleaner air, clearer skies. In all sorts of ways, the human impact has been reduced, and we've seen measurable, tangible benefits to the quality of our lives as a result. So in this conversation today, we're going to be investigating exactly that through the lens of a range of different pollutants. And we've got some incredible experts here. So in this conversation, we're going to be talking about the impact of air quality, litter, sound, and even light pollution, and the role that that plays in the quality of our built environment, and ultimately what we as a design community can do to mitigate it and to create happier and healthier spaces to live and work in. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask each of our four speakers to get up and just spend 5 minutes telling you a little bit more about the amazing stuff that they're doing. And it really is amazing. There's a whole world of knowledge within each of these different pollutants that is just absolutely mind-blowing, that will be affecting you in each way. They're each going to stand up, speak for 5 minutes. If they speak for much longer, I'm going to have to obviously take them down verbally, initially, at least. Ask them to sit down. And after that, we're going to have a series of questions. Sadly, because of COVID, we're not able to take questions from the audience because we can't pass microphones around. But I'm sure what you hear from this crowd is going to be absolutely fascinating. So joining us today, we have Georgia Elliot Smith from Element 4, Truin Restrick from Hubbub, Poppy Skeeler, I never say that right, Skeeler, and Kerem Asrulugu. I haven't said that right either. That's a really great start from Oliver Heath at the beginning of the third of the Blended Talks. So to kick this off properly, I'm going to ask Kerem to stand up and tell us a little bit more about what he does in Dark Skies.
No pressure. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. So I'm a lighting designer. I'm the founder of a lighting design practice called Dark Source, which is a design practice that is driven with social and environmental values. So we specialize in battling light pollution. So what is light pollution in very short, and what it means for us and why should we be concerned about it is light is basically not visible until it hits the surface, and light that is traveling upwards, meeting particles like dust or like humidity, it manifests itself as a sky glow, so you can't see the stars anymore. Why should it matter? Because it accounts to 6% of the carbon emissions. About 1 billion pounds a year is wasted on wasted light. And on top of everything, it's got a tremendous environmental impact, which is the decline of the moths and many animals, migrant birds or sea turtles. We tend to be the species that requires the light the most, but get affected by it the least. But we also get affected by it because our sleeping rhythm and pattern, biological clock get also disturbed by it. So what do we advocate is use the amount of light where you need it, in the amount that you need it, and switch it off when you don't use it. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's probably the gist of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Poppy.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Poppy Skeeler. I'm a third generation noise campaigner. So Grandpa, back in 1959, after World War II, he realised that everything was getting very noisy. So he wrote a letter to the Daily Telegraph, just like you or I could, saying, is anyone else experiencing this? And he received, no computers in that day, sackfuls of mail. So he thought, right, this is a problem somebody needs to solve. And being a sparky entrepreneur, he founded the Noise Abatement Society. And the first thing he did was single-handedly lobby Parliament to create the Noise Pollution Act, which was the first time that noise was put on the map really as a pollutant, as something that affects human health. And the charity, the Noise Abatement Society, has been running now for 64 years. My mother still runs it. And 10 years ago, I was actually in the film industry. We knew that it needed a new expression for the next generation to really understand how sound affects all of our physical rhythms, our heart rate, our hormone secretion, our productivity, our sleep. Every single human being with ears is affected by noise. So this is a huge problem. And Quiet Mark was founded in 2011, which was a certification mark. So the first global certification mark where we set about speaking to all the manufacturers in the world, which was quite a big task, and we're still doing that daily, to basically find and then champion the quietest products. And this is highly technical and very geeky. We have acoustic labs in London and New York and different locations in the world where we have created a real life environment where you or I might live typically with hard surfaces, and we measure every single type of home technology product, from air purifiers to hairdryers to dishwashers. And then also we triangulate and measure with acoustic experts the acoustic materials that make up our building environment. So 20 months ago, just before lockdown, we launched Acoustics Academy, which is part of quietmark.com, the global hub with a charitable remit to help people buy quiet, design quiet, and specify quiet, which is basically the way we're going to solve noise pollution for all of our benefit, whoever you are, whatever you're doing. Noise pollution is contextual. So you can be at an amazing party enjoying it, but the nurse that's got to get up for her night shift, who likes to party, needs to get to sleep, and if you've got really thin walls and a really noisy washing machine, etc., this is where the problem is with noise. One person can be enjoying it, and actually the other person can be suffering. So the Quiet Mark certification has become almost like a runway to solve noise pollution on a global level by working directly with the manufacturers at R&D level. So it's probably enough for me for now, because I could talk for hours about that.
Truan.
Thanks so much. I'm going to talk quickly because I don't want to be taken down by Oliver. My name's Truan Restrick. About 7 years ago, I had a belated midlife crisis and set up the environment charity called Hubbub. And Hubbub's aim is to take environmental messages to a mainstream audience. And we do that by talking about the things that we think people are passionate about. So the clothes they wear, the food they eat, the homes they live in and their neighborhoods. We collaborate with business to run campaigns. We create campaigns around brilliant behavior change techniques, fabulous design. We run the campaigns, we measure everything. We share all the failures and some of the successes and hope that people will learn from the mistakes and steal the best bits. So that's the business model. And because of the way we work, and because we basically listen to what concerns people, we have a whole variety of campaigns which all fit under this sort of topic of toxic cities. So that can range from littering. So an example of a campaign we run with littering is the most dropped item of litter is a cigarette butt. Cigarette butts contain plastic, so that contributes to plastic pollution. The most likely person to drop a cigarette butt is a drunk young bloke. So how do you stop a piss bloke dropping a cigarette butt? That was our question. So we thought, well, they probably quite a lot of them like sport. So let's create a voting cigarette bin and ask a sports question. So we asked, who's the best football player in the world? Is it Ronaldo or Messi? Vote with your cigarette butt. We stacked the bin at the time. Messi was the better player, but we stacked it so it looked like Ronaldo was going to win. People were like, what do smokers know about cigarettes? We had 76,000 Facebook likes in a day. And then I started getting requests all around the world. Can we have a cigarette bin, please? Which was difficult because we only had one, which was based just near Charing Cross. So we've now created a social enterprise. We've sold bins all around the world. Everywhere they go, they've dropped littering by about 40%. And we've had loads of votes on Brexit. You know, is Donald Trump's hair real? Lots of different questions. So that's how we use nudge techniques to get people to change their behaviour. And what we've discovered because of COVID is that people's awareness of their individual activity and how it interacts with their cities has grown and grown and grown. And we're looking at trying to help people understand that connection and make changes. So, for example, we've put air pollution monitors on individuals so they can see where the highest levels of air pollution are. And they suddenly realize that if they don't walk down a busy street or they change their routines, they can avoid the worst cases of air pollution. We've been working in Tower Hamlets where we discovered that people have started to love cycling, but they have lots of resistance to cycling, particularly women from minority communities. So we've been working with a group called Cycle Sisters in Tower Hamlets, it's a Bangladesh women community, and looking at how can we help them cycle. And we just set up a bike library in Tower Hamlets where people can rent bikes, get guidance on safety, but also can sort of fit it with the cultural pressures that they face. So we've got loads of campaigns like that. Yesterday, even we had went to the Grenville estate where we've worked with the Grenville estate community. We've introduced a community fridge, which takes food that would have been wasted, perishable food, puts it into a fridge, and anybody can take from the fridge. So it's a completely free resource. And alongside that, we've got a growing scheme so that residents can start to grow the food that's important to their cultures. That food is then put into the fridge. It can be taken by anybody, and we have cooking lessons alongside it. There are now 200 community fridges around the UK, but it's another example of how we work with local communities to help them reduce waste, food waste in this instance, but also to create a better growing space and a sense of community within that estate. So that's what we do.
Lovely, thank you.
Lovely.
Georgia.
Thank you. Hi, nice to meet you all. My name's Georgia Elliot Smith. I am the Managing Director of Sustainability Consultancy Element 4. So we work in the built environment sector primarily. We help corporates to develop proper kick-ass sustainability strategies that actually mean something, aren't just bits of paper that look good in a tender, look good but don't deliver. So we really challenge our clients to get them there and deliver social and environmental good. And we work on property projects as well. So we work with architects, engineers, developers, asset managers, occupiers to try and make their buildings green and healthy and just great places to live and work. On top of that, I'm on a personal mission as well. I'm currently taking the government to court over climate change. And I'm an Extinction Rebellion activist as well. So I'm a fully out of the closet, thank you, activist. And I'm on a mission to turn everybody into their own activist. I really, really think, we need to claim the word activist like we've reclaimed feminism. We need activists to be the way that everybody behaves in their lives, because there are things going on, systems, that need changing. And I think all of us have a voice and all of us have some power as an influencer, as a family member, as an employee, as a friend, as a voter, as a consumer. And there's a way in which we can bring that power to all the choices we make. So I'm here today really to talk about pollution and specifically about air pollution. So air pollution in cities, on the face of it, it seems like our cities are much cleaner than they used to be. Really, the issue is that the pollution has just become invisible. So the sort of pollution that we're experiencing in our cities today is fine and ultra-fine particulates and invisible gases like nitrogen dioxide and ozone. Those things, although they get geeky very quickly, have a really, really big impact on our lives, and particularly for those people who live in cities, and particularly for those people who live in densely occupied areas, who live near main roads or live in substandard housing, which tends to be a social justice issue for those in minority communities. The things that we really need to start addressing is combustion. So there's a very clear link between air pollution and climate change. What we need to do in our homes, in our buildings, everywhere is to avoid combustion. It's a really, really big issue. And what we now know, huge amounts of new scientific research are coming through now demonstrating the impact on our health from ultrafine particulates. Now, those are particles, the very, very finest particles that are able to get into our bloodstreams and cross through the blood-brain barrier. And links are now being made to conditions, strokes, asthma, Ultrafine particulates can generate asthma in people who previously did not suffer from it. So anybody like me who moved to a city and then got asthma might identify with that. And also dementia. There are links between dementia and air pollution, also autism spectrum disorder. And so the new science that is evolving around air pollution is really, really compelling, although our understanding of it is not that strong. So I work with developers, I work with all sorts of people within the built environment sector, and I'm also an anti-waste incineration campaigner, which is another whole talk all on its own. A lot of our waste in this country goes to incineration, which is sort of touted as a green solution. It's not. Spoiler, it's not. And I'm happy to talk about that another time. But yes, air pollution is my thing. And I'll end on that.
Lovely. Thank you. So there are some obviously really big issues. And I, as far as I understand, unless we can actually measure this stuff, it's very difficult to care about it. And, we're seeing the rollout of smart meters in people's homes, which are engaging with the idea of something that is also invisible, essentially electricity and gas. And by having that meter, we can start to care about it. A lot of these things are happening on a citywide level. How do we actually get people to engage with it by measuring? How would you measure something like air quality when, like you say, it's impossible? How do we measure cigarette butts in a space? I mean, do you literally carry them, or do you use drones? So can you just tell me about how do we engage people with this by measuring, first of all?
So I think I'll start because I'm holding the mic. The way that we look at air pollution really is by the impacts that it causes. There was a recent report that came out from the Clean Air Fund and CBI Economics. And what it found was that 3 million working hours are lost due to air pollution impacts. And that's from people who are either ill or have to care for those who are ill. That's every year, 3 million hours. And also the economic impact of that, £1.6 billion in the UK economy from... £1.6 billion in the UK economy. Okay. Go on. How much was it? Just from those working lost hours. But there's also a burden on the NHS, and there's a burden on our education system and so on from those unhealthy living hours, and there's a burden on quality of life. What we don't do in this country very well is measure air pollution. There's only one monitoring station in London that measures ultrafine particulates, and that's in Westminster. And so, what we really need is a much better rollout of this tech. As our scientific understanding increases, we need to be lobbying the government for better monitoring tech and then more responsive policies.
One monitoring station.
Yeah.
Only one in London?
Only one for ultrafine particulates.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And so any project that needs to model their impact on air quality, they don't take readings of actual ultrafine particulates. They just model it based on the readings from one station in Westminster. So we're not, the projects that are getting planning consent are not necessarily based on the actual air quality of the community where it's being built. It's all modelled and estimated. So yeah, our understanding is quite poor.
Good. Truan, how do you measure some of the things? I mean, you run across a range of different campaigns, but something like cigarette butts, is that literally like just counting them up?
Well, let me go on to the air quality one first, because we actually put, with King's College London, we put air quality monitors on somebody, so they measured particulates for an entire week, and we tracked everything. And when it's personalised, where the impact is. So people discovered that if they changed their cycling route, that would lower their impact. People were shocked about the amount of pollution in the deep tube lines. There was even one of the women did yoga, and she couldn't work out why her figures were spiking during the hour. It's because she was surrounded by candles. So you really start to see what the connection is. And when we did that with a developer like Grosvenor Estate, what they could then start to do was to help their employees find greener or less polluted routes to work. They could show them where they would be less polluted at lunchtime, but they could also then start to think about the steps they should be taking as a developer to create this sort of greener pathways in the city. On littering, we've been flying drones over Bournemouth, and we've done 3 lots. We did 1 during lockdown and 2 during bank holidays to measure, literally measure every single piece of litter, so we know where it's come from, who's produced it, and when it was dropped. And again, it's fascinating. So one of the things we found is that a lot of the takeaways along the beach are served in those sort of polystyrene sort of things. people put them on the beach, the seagulls attack them, they break them down into small bits of plastic. The tide comes in, that's immediately washed out into the ocean. And we've got data about what that pollution was, how much was created, and it shows us, it gives us something really practical to go to the council saying, you know, you should be banning these. You should have a reuse scheme for containers. So, you know, a lot of the environmental steps we're taking is based on assumption, but as soon as you have hard data, it gets a lot harder for people to wriggle out of things.
And Poppy, obviously a lot of your work is around individual products, but when we scale it up to a street or a neighborhood, how do we kind of get a handle on that?
Absolutely, and we've got to start one brick at a time. So the Acoustics Academy that we launched was literally to look into the claims and performance of manufacturers and brands that are making all different materials. So when you're, as a designer or an interior designer, you're looking at a specific application project, you need to know kind of what is the best for flooring and walls and windows and the whole of the system of the house. And it's a whole selection of things that are needed to be understood. So we're making it easier for people to find them quicker by doing all of that due diligence. I think the average architect goes to school for 8 years, but I think 1 day is spent on acoustics. And when we join up that acoustics equals well-being, that is the catalyst of awakening that's happening at the moment, that those two together create an environment now post-pandemic which is going to bring people back into the office or create a home which can cope with the pressure of all of life happening under one roof if you're still working from home. So there's a huge adjustment that's taken place. I'm probably one of the next questions you're asking, and I won't move on to that about post-pandemic, but essentially providing all of the measurement and the due diligence on the really complex science of acoustics is what we have begun tackling to make a sort of a quick route for designers to be able to select the right thing for the right application amongst all the other decisions they have to make in the design process.
Karen.
Thank you. In terms of measuring light pollution, it's actually straightforward. You could do it with a luminance meter, just basically shine it, pointing it up to the sky. You would have a rough understanding about the sky quality that you have. On top of that, lux readings, etc. But one of the things that makes very challenging for light pollution to be understood and recognized, we have a very, very adaptive and very powerful visual system. This means, if our environment is getting brighter as a whole, we don't tend to realize it very well because we need a point of reference and comparison. So our visual system is actually more sensitive to contrast than absolute light levels. So we don't tend to recognize when our cities are getting brighter. In terms of light, the impact that it has, and how we deal with that is. Consumption is one part of it. For example, we're doing a project which will be completed soon by the end of this month. We're working with Snowdonia National Park Authority in Wales. It's a somewhat large area of an outdoor lighting project. And we've done a calculation to see how we improved the situation. And we've achieved our dark skies. Snowdonia National Park Authority is a dark sky reserve. What was interesting is that we actually removed about 2 tons of carbon emissions in there by just basically switching from sodium fluorescent old light fittings to LEDs that are warmer color temperatures, tend to be good for the environment. Whatever is astronomer friendly is also biodiversity friendly. Warmer color temperatures don't tend to travel further in the atmosphere because of a phenomenon it's called Rayleigh scattering effect. Sky basically favors cooler color temperatures to scatter it further. And then we wanted to understand how much money that we were saving. It was only 1,200 pounds annually, and it communicates to 2 tons of CO2 emissions and 7,500 kilowatts of energy. That's a massive amount of power. What I'm trying to get at is consuming is favorable. Within this society, it's made favorable. So therefore, it's very difficult to understand the real repercussions of our consumption. Obviously, the impact that it has on the environment is definitely going to be more than 1,200 pounds annually, but kind of puts things into perspective in terms of measuring.
Okay, so obviously we're able to get a handle on what it is that's happening. Do we know exactly who it is that's being worst affected? And when I say who, I mean, are there particular social groups that are being more affected? Is there a negative effect for fauna and flora as well? I mean, do trees get affected by light pollution? Because you'd imagine that they're used to growing at a particular time of day, and if they've got excess light at night, does that affect them?
Absolutely. So all life on this planet evolved around the cycle of day and night. We all living things, including animals, plants, insects, humans, we have a biological clock. Regardless if you're a nighttime shift worker or if you're, I don't know, a heavy clubber, doesn't matter. Your biological clock will still will require sleep. Or sleep-like behaviors. And 70% of the life on this planet is actually nocturnal. What impact? Trees don't like to be lit. We got all these uplights and they're all diffused. So this means they will scatter the light. And what will happen is, just for the visual ambition of creating some really nice lighting, it will look amazing, by the way. Uplit trees always look great. The foliage looks great. But the impact it has is light will eventually hit on some of the leaves and it will travel further up to the sky. Because it's diffused, it will scatter in every direction. So I think one of the challenges is that lighting design, for example, is quite driven with visual ambition that doesn't really account into light needs to come down, and any light that is going up is always going to be a challenge. On top of that, flora and fauna and biodiversity, we never really truly understand the importance of pollinators for us until this decade. Bats, moths, decline of bees is heavily related to light pollution because unfortunately their visual system is not that privileged enough to avoid bright sources. This is why we get millions of birds colliding into buildings, particularly in the migration period. Insect population decline is heavily related to light pollution. On top of that, what impact it has on us? Light pollution is not only just easy environmental issue, it's also socio-political issue. So for example, if you're a person who has to do night shift work, or you have family to take care of and you have to still go do night shift, it's absolutely terrible for your biological clock. But how do you overcome this? So there's some societal changes required as much as, that just basically changing the way consuming light. And also in the environmental aspect is light comes at a cost. It's producing is quite a bit of money, and like consuming is also comes with a cost. I think if we are to not produce this much, we wouldn't be necessarily causing that much impact on the biodiversity or flora and fauna. But I think on ourselves, because we're all governed by the sleep hormone melatonin, and if you don't get enough your sleep, that might differ for all of you guys. Some might be 7 hours, some might be 6, some might be 8. But it has detrimental effect on your health, and there's patterns of increasing cancer risks with night shift workers and breast cancer risk with particularly women working at night. It actually impacts on us. So, and what I find very interesting, I'll just finish it up with the sound aspect, was this. To me, we all of us had this. Our neighbors having a party, they're very loud, and you can just knock on the door and say, could you turn it down a bit? But when it comes to light, because of our adaptive visual system actually starts playing against us, we're far more tolerant. We got measures like curtains and stuff like that. Night nuisance, light spill is a bit more tolerated. Actually, it shouldn't be. We should just it should be treated like you're basically polluting my environment. Could you keep it down?
Poppy, Kerem touched on the subject of circadian systems there, and obviously that's normally associated with the visual system, the light, but equally we have acoustic circadian systems. It's sort of acoustic pollution affecting both people and fauna and flora in any particular way? I mean, how are groups, which particular groups are being affected?
Well, the whole of life, all that we are frequencies. So whether it's light frequencies or sound frequencies, there are certain frequencies, let's keep it really simple, that our body, really enjoys and works with. So say, you're lying on a beach and there's a beautiful broadband sound of the water going backwards and forwards. Isn't that wonderful and relaxing? But then there are all the frequencies which we hear all the time, whether it's a beeping reversing alarm, or air noise, traffic noise, all of the layers of noise that we experience that are completely out of tune with how the design of our body and the way our brain, the way all of our systems work with those frequencies. And there are optimum frequencies. So when we work with lots of manufacturers and who are trying to design, they really are trying to design products that are in harmony with nature. We have to go back to what are the frequencies that work well for the human being first, or for the plant systems, or that there are certain rules that have been written. And often man tries to sort of design things over the top, thinking that, but often there's nothing new under the sun. We have to go back to what is the heart rates and the brain wave compatibility with those sounds that then puts the responsibility back onto those designers to design for the human rather than the other way around. So it's a huge topic. I think it's Boeing have designed a massive new jet engine, which is 50% quieter than ever before. If something of that great power can be designed mimicking nature, it really is about looking at it's really the care and the consideration right back to the beginning of product design and the way we design buildings, the way we the type of tarmac we put on a street. There are things which can reflect noise, which completely changes the way we would experience that whole street and that whole neighborhood. So it's a huge complex pollutant to solve, but it goes back down to almost going back to nature and looking at how nature makes it sound, and then trying to imitate it in the design process or the way we build our homes and neighborhoods.
Chuan, again, the same question to you. Are there particular groups that are affected by the campaigns? I mean, you're talking about littering there. You've mentioned a little bit about the seagulls and then the plastics going in. So you've mentioned this idea of it affecting fauna on flora and the wider environment. Are there particular groups within society that are more adversely affected by pollutants that we find, such as littering?
Yes, there are. I mean, I think what COVID did was it extended all the social splits even further in this country. So you had some people merrily making their sourdough bread, and then you had others really struggling to put food on the table. And then what we saw in COVID was that people wanted to spend more time in green space. And if you look at the statistics, it's those in low income areas don't have easy access to that green space, and they almost certainly don't have a garden. People really relished having cleaner air, but it's, the people in busy urban centres like Tower Hamlets who suffer from poor air pollution. And very often that poor air pollution is because other people are driving through the borough to get to Canary Wharf, wherever they work. So they're not even responsible for the poor air quality. And I think where the whole climate change debate has to get to, and the environmental debate, is to link the environmental issues with social issues. Because to have a sustainable society, it needs to be socially just. And that means that there has to be fairness of resources, fair access to green space, fair access to good air quality. And the environmental world has not been very good at talking about social issues. It sort of sits in this nice privileged muesli belt over here. And that's got to break down if we are to get to a truly socially just, sustainable society. And COVID's demonstrated the need to do that. So, there's the link between social justice and climate and environmental justice is incredibly close. And COVID has shown us that.
Georgia, any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I couldn't agree more. I think that social justice and environmental impact are so entwined. And I think I mean, not just in this country, but internationally, you know, those that bear the brunt of pollution, those who are living with the worst effects of climate change, the worst effects of environmental degradation, are those that are least responsible for it in the first place. And so I am quite concerned about the COP talks, you know, about the fact that, you know, it is that people from the global south are not necessarily being listened to. Island states are being marginalized. And particularly with the COVID, you know, with the pandemic now and the restrictions of travel, a lot of those people are not even able to travel to the conference to talk. So, you know, I think there's a big issue that's intertwines environmental and social justice. I think another point I'd like to make on air pollution, a dear friend of mine is Rosamund Kissy-Deborah, who is the mother of Ella Kissy-Deborah, who was the 9-year-old girl who died from catastrophic asthma attack in Lewisham in South London 7 years ago. She was just 9 years old. And her campaign led to a decision by the Southwark coroner in December last year that made Ella the first person in the world to have air pollution put on her death certificate as cause of death. Now that in London particularly, but throughout the rest of the UK, has really drawn a lot of attention to the health impacts of particularly chronic exposure to air pollution. So, you know, there's a wonderful thing about, you know, sitting around a bonfire, or, you know, sort of things that can happen around fires that, you know, are lovely primal things, but that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is chronic exposure to invisible pollutants in our environment. Unfortunately, they live near a very busy road. But one of the big upshots of that campaign is to try and educate people, educate even healthcare professionals, doctors, that they should be advising people about the connections between air pollution and health. So things like even walking one street away from a busy road, I think you mentioned this, can halve your exposure to really toxic air pollution, you know, just taking it one street away. Things like that people should know. And particularly designers as well. You know, we've been talking a lot about external air pollution. I want to talk for a moment about indoor air pollution. You know, there's a huge problem with indoor air pollution, which is invisible, but there's a lot that we can do about that. So, you know, if you are cooking, if you're thinking of replacing your stove, go for electric, don't go for gas. Try and avoid combustion inside your home. The cooker hood, you know, I learned through Roz, there's amazing techniques that she's learned because her other children also have asthma. But things like put your cooker hood on 10 minutes before you start cooking, because that will start an airflow in your home that actually draws out the pollutants while you're cooking. But then for designers internally, things like making sure that we're designing in low toxin products. So make sure those products are free from adhesives, free from solvents. There's an amazing growth now in products that are formaldehyde free and solvent free. You know, ask your supply chain about those products. The new car smell that you get with new products, that's bad. Okay, we don't want the new car smell. That's all kinds of nasty solvents, flame retardants, you know, horrible things. So if you walk into a new environment and it's got that new smell, run, run the other way, or certainly point it out to the designer and say, you know, we need to be getting rid of this. We need to be routinely putting in air flush, you know, whole building air flushes when we finish a construction project. You know, at the moment, that's a nice to have. The contractor should be doing a whole building air flush. We should be routinely making sure that facilities managers are replacing air filtration, and we need to be designing in air quality monitors that are aligned with, there's an international standard called the RESET standard. Now that came out of China because of their terrible air quality in cities. They developed a standard for the quality of air sensor tech, and also for where you put those, because where you put the sensor is as important as having the sensor. There's no point having it in a corridor. You need it where people are actually living, breathing, and so on. And through all of that data, you know, we can start to get really good information about what's going on, what products we're bringing into our homes. You know, I'm interested in your work on noise and products. I think air quality associated to products is really important too, and it's just a kind of burgeoning field.
Okay, so how do we fix this? That's a really interesting product in the Natural Living exhibition. If you go in on the left-hand side, and it's a combined green wall air purifying unit. And essentially what it does is it takes the air quality, it takes it through the leaves, and it takes the air through the roots and then the soil medium, and then it filters out, all that filters out through the bacteria, the pollutants in the air, and pumps fresh air back out. So my question to you really is, what role does nature play in mitigating some of these pollutants? Can we rely on nature to capture the air pollutants, and is that actually feasible, or do we need to bring technology in to start combing and breathing and filtering out some of these things?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is city trees are amazing. You know, we've been using plane trees, London plane trees, for years to capture pollutants from the air and draw them out. The unfortunate thing is that so many of those are now being cut down, you know, because they're a bit of a maintenance cost for local authorities. So, you know, I'm not here to slate local authorities. They're under a huge amount of pressure with their budgets and so on. But we do need a lot of joined up thinking about bringing a lot more greenery into our cities. It's not only great for mental health, but it's good for air quality too. And then, of course, you know, prevention is better than cure. Getting rid of these sources of combustion, getting rid of these nasty chemicals that we're bringing into our spaces. You know, that has to be the first thing that we do as designers, as developers, is avoiding those impacts in the first place.
In a way, technology plays a role simply by getting rid of it in the first place, so not allowing it to happen. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, the technology, like air filtration is there are some amazing air filters out there. Unfortunately, the air filtration and the air sensor world is a bit of a wild west at the moment. So, you know, there are a vast number of products coming to market. So you do need to have a bit of critical thinking, you know, to compare all those different products. And I think standards like Reset are really helpful because they're like a quality mark for particularly air sensor tech. But yeah, you know, I probably wouldn't jump immediately to the air filter tech. The first thing I would ask is what is creating the pollution in this space in the first place? You know, are people coming into the office and doing the Lynx effect thing in the middle of our space? You know, are we spraying? Are we using air fresheners? I mean, air fresheners are just the most horrible, toxic things. You know, it's so ironic. We shouldn't be using them, you know, bringing that into our space. So I'll pass on anyway, because I could talk for hours on this.
Julian, are there nature-based solutions to some of the issues that you're facing, or is it just about intervention?
Well, I'm sure there are. It's not our start point. Our start point is to go and listen to the concerns of people, what they want to sort of have for a better quality of life, what the barriers that are stopping them from having that fulfilling life they want. And all of our interventions are based from that insight. And what we see a lot of design is a designer's thought something is a good idea, imposes it on a community, and then the community doesn't connect with it, doesn't understand how to use it. So we take a very different approach. And then we use sort of nudge techniques and sort of positive reinforcement to get people to change their behavior. But, you know, it's such a huge systemic change that we're facing that you can't rely on individuals. You've got to make it easy for them to do the right thing. And I think the air quality one's really interesting because what COVID did was it showed that if everybody changed their behavior, you get massive change. So air quality in London during the lockdown improved substantially. People noticed it, they liked it, they wanted it. Then what happened was the lockdown started to lift and people are like, well, I'm not getting on a tube. So what you've seen is sales of secondhand cars has rocketed and we're back to pretty much as we were before, if not worse. So people saw the impact, they want to do the right thing, but the system was buy a secondhand car to make sure you keep your family safe. So you have to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. And that's where design and politicians come in. It's not just about individual behavior.
And Poppy, there's quite a lot of research about the ability for plants, to the introduction of plants and greenery to improve acoustics. And obviously we're sitting here in this gorgeous green hug of a space that is to some extent protecting us from all the other acoustic activity that's going on. And there's really a lot. I find it very noisy out there, but find this kind of rather nicely contained. Can we look towards nature to mitigate some of that, to soak it up?
The whole headline here is getting technology and design back in harmony with nature, going right back to the Garden of Eden. How does it work in nature? And then bringing that into the, you know, high consuming lifestyles we have, which have to be weaned, you know, we have to wean ourselves off certain things. But essentially what you were saying about making it easy for people to find the products, we have pioneered partnerships with every single retailer from John Lewis, Argos, where there's now a Quiet Mark landing page and you can find all the certified products there. So to empower the multi-millions in this country, whatever you're buying, to buy quiet is the way we're going to turn the tide, because then the manufacturers go, oh gosh, of course we've got to invest in acoustics, everybody wants it. So it's actually, we have got the power to make the change ourselves. That's obviously consumer products, but when it comes to designing spaces, the Acoustics Academy we've started is exactly the same thing, by equipping and empowering architects and designers with the most brilliant nature-inspired, often including, plant-based recycling in the best way possible. All the checks we do on the sustainability creds of the products that are awarded on Acoustics Academy, if we all choose those products and the sales of those go up, well, of course, everyone, wanting to make their massive profits, are suddenly going to have to start putting their money behind acoustics that actually are regenerating plastics in the best way possible, not making any more, and all of the above. So we would love to all live in the forest. We can't. But bringing more and more plants into our homes is a wonderful way of natural plants absorb sound beautifully. And I think, James Dyson, he's the most brilliant example of looking at nature to design his extraordinary inventions, how the wings of an owl move, to look at how, for example, a hairdryer is made, and calling it, the latest sonic invention, because he's looked at how nature's works with sound, often broadband sound, and put it into the technology that we all surround ourselves with. So we have got the power to make the decision and the choice, and I think that's, to be positive, we need to inform ourselves really about how to find those products and champion them.
As we're starting to run out of time, just want to kind of move on to one last question, or before we get to the final two. That's maybe, we've got 3 more questions then. Karen, give us an example of a success story where you've managed to mitigate light pollution that it's benefited both people, nature, and planet. So give us a success story. Big yourself up.
So. It's challenging to find satisfying success stories when it comes to that. What I find interesting is with the people that I work with. The smaller communities are much more fun and easy to work with because these people can mobilize very quickly. The challenge I find, for example, working in London context is, how do you break the bad news is London is gone, man. It's a very light polluted town. We have about 1 lux average, equivalent of a moonlit night, just basically because of the light pollution. But it could get worse. It could be like Hong Kong. It could be like, Dubai. There's always the threshold, as I told you guys. Our visual system is quite broad, which becomes challenging. So the success stories I have is obviously you can do a lot within a densely populated town like London. But achieving perfect dark skies will be a challenge. You might be very diligent, you might be a very, very hardworking community, but because London itself has to also change, the grid has to change, the lawmakers need to enable this. So what's interesting is if all these guys, for example, achieve their goal, my life would be easier as well, because if you remove the air pollution, then there's less light pollution because there's less particles. If you remove the sound pollution, this means people will be more attuned to actually other elements because their perception won't be heightened at all times. So the success story, for example, that we're working with a community eco village in Ireland, in Tipperary. It's called the Clock Jordan Eco Village. And these guys are so well connected, and we have about 100 stakeholders, and they are all after protecting their dark skies because they caught on to the fact that darkness is a resource to protect. So the reason I call my practice dark source is you can produce light, but you cannot produce darkness. You can only preserve darkness. Although people often think of light as brightness, or as all languages and cultures refer to the brightness element of light, but light is actually a balance of brightness and darkness. If it's overexposed in very lit environment, you wouldn't experience anything. If it's completely dark, you wouldn't experience anything. So we've had a very good working relationship that actually it's very easy when you have environmentally savvy people to work with, in terms of picking the right technology, making sure that the environment is the utmost important element to take care of, making sure the species around you and what the lighting regime will be like, because one of the qualities that you get with LEDs is dimmability, and we're also implementing PIR sensors. So if there's nobody around at night, there's no point for light to be out, because look, there's a reason why our cities are lit. It's because it encourages, it elevates safety, perception of security, also, wayfinding, legibility, call drops when it's night. It's a really beautiful place to be. Like, in a couple of hours, you'll see. But it comes at a cost, and there's absolutely no evidence that adding more light into our cityscapes actually deters crime. And it comes from helplessness, basically, because it looks like you're adding something, and it looks like you're doing something, but it's not necessarily relating to the fact that it's actually, doing anything. Thanks.
Thank you. Poppy, give us a success story where you managed to make a difference to people's lives.
I think I probably said it already, which is, pioneering a movement across British retailers to affect, every type of British household to buy quiet has never been achieved before. And I think really just holding the line at the moment. We have a in-house campaign, PR campaign, where we're speaking with news editors every day, keeping it in the conversation, keeping it in the newspapers, keeping it in the magazine, talking about it so that more and more people get aware of it. It sounds like, pretty old and basic stuff, but actually just doing that every single day with our extraordinary team, meaning that more and more people are awakened to the importance of it. So I think that just the constant communication of the facts and the knowledge and the insights is, as the only charity in the UK standing for noise pollution, the Noise Abatement Society, Quiet Mark funds the charity. In fact, that's why we started it, was to keep that going. The lobbying, which is extremely hard work, which you need a huge amount of dedication and passion to turn the dial. But I think in that sense, just empowering the individual to know that they can make a choice that can completely transform the way their home is, or a design practice completely realign their agenda to say, right, acoustics is going to go right to the top of our list now. If we can create the comfort and the wonder for people to come back into the office and want to come back in because it just feels so warm and cocooning, rather than having beeps and bleeps and hard surfaces that are literally people can't concentrate, and a human being can cope with 1.5 conversations at once. So if you put 20 in the room, you'd have to work all night just to catch up with what you're supposed to do during the day, and then you've got families and all the rest. The stress builds up. So putting that as a priority into every design practice, please do that. You will change the world just by focusing on some beautiful acoustic products in all of your new projects this year.
Thank you. Trewin, a project that you've been really proud of that's made a difference.
I think what I want to talk about is that small organizations can create big change by working with businesses. So I'll give you 2 very quick examples. The first is we managed to persuade Starbucks to add 5p to the price of a disposable cup. So if you get a disposable coffee cup from Starbucks, it costs you 5p extra. 2 things happened. The take-up of reusable cups doubled instantly. And then the second thing that happened was they gave that 5p to us, and we're investing it to deal with single plastic pollution. Their reputation actually went up because they put an added cost on their cup. And the second example is with O2, which is that the UK has, believe this or not, 11 million people are digitally isolated in the UK. You just imagine not being able to get access to the internet during COVID. You couldn't talk to your doctors, you couldn't talk to your family, you couldn't talk to your friends. And at the same time, the UK has the second highest capita waste of electronic goods. I'm sure lots of you have got smartphones, other tablets and things sitting in your drawers at home or at work. So all of those things could be a lifeline to somebody who's digitally isolated. So we managed to persuade O2 to fund a campaign called Community Calling, which collected up all of those unused smart devices, physically cleaned them, digitally cleaned them. We then partnered up with local charities to give them out to the people who really needed it. But absolutely crucially, O2 agreed to give out free data. So not only did they get a device, they got training, but they also got data so they could use it. And for me, that's the coming together of environment and social, which is you're dealing with chronic e-waste, but you're also enabling people who are socially isolated to connect to friends and neighbors and get jobs. So that, I think, is how small organizations can work with big businesses to change things.
Great. Thank you. And Georgia, you may have another example, but your lobbying success, campaign, just be an inspiration to hear about.
Oh, thank you. I've been... I started out, I suppose my journey was that I've been an environmental engineer now for 25 years, and I was working in industry and feeling like we were tinkering around the edges. So we did have some successes, and we were very vocal about those amazing successes, but really in my heart, I knew we could be doing a lot more. So I started pressing for change a lot more. And I think for environmental professionals in industry, there is a real sense of learned helplessness, because you come up against the same arguments all the time about there's not enough money, we don't have enough time, you can't change things, the products aren't available, and on and on. You know, it's not the way we do it. So whenever you enter a meeting, it's very easy to defer into that sort of, we'll try and press for change, but I know we're not going to really get that far. So it'll be lovely if we do. But, you know, and I kind of got into that mindset. Anyway, and then 2019 happened, and the first Extinction Rebellion uprising. And at that time, I'd gone through a real kind of period of depression, really, about what was going on in the world. You know, the IPCC report, the 1.5 degrees, and the world was on fire. You know, the Amazon was on fire, and the David Attenborough documentaries, and realized at that point I was part of the problem. And so that's really where my rebirth kind of started as an activist. And I joined Extinction Rebellion, and I started making meaningful change. So I now, with my clients every day, press them, challenge them, really push for meaningful change. And I think that's the word for me is meaningful. You know, anyone can change a bit, and that was what was going on, but it's about meaningful change. And you can't change everything, but if you can focus on meaningful change in a particular area on each of your projects, then that is a real win, and it drives industry forwards. So what I'll finish on is the fact that my biggest win is, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm taking the UK government to court at the moment over climate and lack of climate ambition. So we were in the High Court. So it's my case is against Secretary of State for BEIS, which at the time was Alok Sharma, is now Kwasi Kwarteng. Alok Sharma, being the president of COP26, put in place a policy which put the UK's industrial carbon cap at about 20% higher than any previously recorded carbon emissions in the UK. And they said that they were compliant with the Climate Change Act because they were putting in place a limit, even though the limit is 20% higher than emissions. I know it makes no sense. So I'm going to court to seek a legal definition of the word limit in the context of the Climate Change Act, because I believe it must mean not enabling an increase, as an absolute minimum, preventing an increase. So we're seeking a judicial definition on that. But within that has been, in one of our hearings at the High Court, a mini win where the judge agreed that the Paris Agreement demands short-term action. And that happened in March this year. That's the first time that an English court has ever said that the Paris Agreement demands immediate action, because what the government has been doing is saying, you know, 78% reduction by 2035, net zero by 2050, essentially just kicking the can down the road to the next administration. And that is not good enough. We're in an emergency. We must act now. So, yeah, that's my success.
Fantastic. Great. It's an inspiration. We're obviously a well-deserved round of applause for Georgia. Thank you. Final question, because we are definitely running out of time. We've got an audience full of architects, designers, landscape designers, construction professionals. How would you encourage these people to affect change in their professional lives, to kind of create cities and spaces that connect more deeply with nature as a result of mitigating some of the pollutants and the toxins that we've been talking about today? So one piece of advice that you would give as a kind of call to action.
I would say choose your company carefully. And not just the company you work for, the company you keep. Because I think it's easy to read stories and be around people who have very different opinions from you. I would say, you know, stick with the winners, stick with people who are inspiring, read inspiring information, you know, open your mind to what is possible, and be around people who are trying to make change happen, because that inspires you. You know, if you stick with people who don't think that the world, you know, will change, then that's the way your mind will work. So I would say, you know, read multiple sources of information, inspire yourself, hang out with people who are on the same mission. You know, that is just the most important thing, to keep your mind open and to challenge the status quo and learn about what's going on in the world.
Fantastic. Trewin?
You can't greenwash science, and you can't greenwash nature. You know, it doesn't listen to it. You know, we're driving carbon up at a rate that's truly not sustainable. And if people need to understand and believe that and act accordingly. And the two things I would say is, understand the people you're creating your service or your building for, understand their needs and really respond to that, and then make it as easy as you possibly can for them to hit these really ambitious carbon targets through absolutely everything you're doing in the creation of the services, the design, the outlay of the layout of your premises or whatever it is. Just think of it all the way through your process, because we've got to hit those targets.
Poppy.
Sound is so intrinsic to all of our human relationship. And if I can just leave one sentence, which is acoustics equals well-being. Sound immediately impacts your heart, your brain, your emotions, your productivity. If we can design and if we can create our spaces that completely support that, we are helping millions and millions of people have better lives. So please put it up the agenda in your design processes. Thank you.
And Karen.
As I mentioned before, that London is a very light polluted city, but that's why, in the contrary, it makes it actually the individual movement very important, because every little counts. Whatever you guys can achieve would be a success. Then there are things that can be done. Basically, proliferation of LEDs became an issue because they're cheaper to buy and easy to use. So when you're buying a light next time, just think twice if you need it really, and if it's going to go outdoors, use warmer color temperatures. Try not to leave them on, and always observe yourself and your surroundings. And also, if you guys ever see a light column that is spilling light into your place, or if you have concerns, you can actually, there's every borough there is one, there's a website where you can find a page. You can report a light fitting. So you guys get that right, and they will need to immediately tackle that, put a shield on it, or etc. So I think it's about with the lockdown, we had the luxury of having the time to observe our surroundings a bit better. Just see this, until recently, our ancestors lived under the brimming night sky full of stars, which inspired art, philosophy, science, religion. It will be very, very sad to just let it go. And, in the meantime, if you're tackling this, you'll be also reducing the impact on the environment as well. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We've come to the end of our third talk today. So thank you to each of our panelists for helping us understand a little bit more about the kind of enormous impact that some of these pollutants that we may not even be thinking about are having on our lives in our cities, and also the nature in our cities. So thank you to Karen, Poppy, Truin, and Georgia for their inspiring words. Hopefully you've been inspired to take some of these ideas forward to create happier and healthier spaces to live and work on, which is exactly what Planted is all about. Thank you also for coming. There is lots more for you to see at the show. Do go and visit the Botanical Market, which is just over there. Go and see the Natural Living Centre and some of the companies that are doing amazing things, and also the Active Air Living Wall Unit that I mentioned before. And we're going to be taking the conversation over to the Sleeping in Nature installation over there. There's a bar selling non-alcoholic seedlit drinks, so you can celebrate Friday in maybe a slightly different way. My name's Oliver Heath. Thank you very much to all of you for attending, and thank you to my most inspirational panel of speakers.